Hey there, YouTube fam! Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're about to delve into the inspiring story of the King's Speech on the silver screen. But before we begin, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our captivating movie summaries. All right, let's jump right into the remarkable journey of the King's Speech. In the year 1925, a king named George V asked his second son, Bertie, to give a speech at a big event in Wembley, London. Bertie, who was also known as the Duke of York, was really scared about talking in front of people because he had a stutter. At the same time, a person at the BBC broadcasting house was getting ready to announce the end of the event, which had millions of people visiting from all over the world. At the event, Bertie's wife, Elizabeth, tried to help him feel brave enough to go on stage, but he was really scared. When he got to the microphone, he was so scared that he struggled to speak. Even though he tried his best, his stutter made it hard for him to talk, and the crowd started getting anxious. Later, at home, Bertie and Elizabeth talked about getting help from a speech therapist. Elizabeth suggested a doctor from Australia named Lionel Logue, who was known for his unusual methods. At first, Bertie didn't want to, but he eventually agreed to try. Elizabeth went to Lionel's office, which wasn't fancy at all. She asked Lionel to help her husband, but didn't tell him that he was a prince. Lionel agreed and said Bertie needed to come to his office for help. Bertie wasn't sure about it, but Elizabeth hoped that Lionel could help him stop stuttering. In another part of the story, Lionel tried out for a role in a play, but was told he wasn't good at acting. Even though he was disappointed, Lionel still wanted to help Bertie with his stutter. Bertie and Elizabeth visited Lionel's office again and went to his therapy room, not knowing what to expect. At their home, Bertie told his daughters a bedtime story about a prince who was a penguin, showing that he could tell stories without stuttering. As the night went on, Bertie and Elizabeth kept talking about Lionel's unusual ways, with Bertie still having doubts. When Bertie and Elizabeth went to Logue's office, they noticed there was no one at the front desk. A young boy named Willie came out of the therapy room and told them they could go in. He called Bertie Mr. Johnson and told Elizabeth that Dr. Logue, who he called Lionel, said she could wait there or walk around. Willie checked with Lionel if it was okay, and Lionel said it was great and asked Bertie to come in. Bertie nodded at Elizabeth, and she sat down. Inside Lionel's therapy room, it felt different from the waiting area. It was full of books and had 2 comfy chairs, an old rug, a hot plate with 2 chipped mugs, a recording device, and model airplanes. Lionel said his sons made the airplanes. He asked Bertie to relax, but Bertie sat in a chair looking uncomfortable, while Lionel sat a bit away. Lionel, the speech therapist, tells Bertie that when talking to a royal person, it's usual to wait for that person to decide what to talk about. Bertie says that if people wait for him to start talking, they might be waiting a long time. They sit quietly for a bit until Lionel asks Bertie if he knows any jokes. Bertie says he's not good at telling jokes, so they just look at each other again. Lionel suggests that he should call Bertie by his first name, but Bertie doesn't like that idea. He says only his family calls him Bertie, but Lionel says that in his office, they should be like friends, and he wants to call him Bertie. Bertie isn't happy about this. He says that if they were really friends, he would be at home with his wife, and nobody would care if he stuttered when he talked. He tries to light a cigarette, but Lionel tells him not to because smoking is bad for you. Bertie says his doctors told him smoking helps his throat relax, but Lionel calls the doctors idiots, even though they're very respected. Lionel asks Bertie about his earliest memory, but Bertie doesn't want to talk about his personal life. Lionel keeps asking why Bertie came to see him if he doesn't want to talk about personal stuff. Bertie gets mad and yells that he's there because he stutters, and when he yells, he doesn't stutter. Lionel notices Bertie's anger, and Bertie admits he has a temper. The therapy session continues with Lionel asking Bertie when his stuttering started. Bertie says he's always stuttered, but Lionel doesn't believe him. He says babies don't start talking with a stutter. They talk more about why Bertie hesitates when he thinks or talks to himself, and other things related to his stuttering. Bertie gets annoyed, but Lionel stays calm and says he's the expert on this. Lionel bets Bertie that he can read a book perfectly without stuttering. If Bertie can do it, he gets to ask Lionel questions. Bertie tries, but stutters a lot and feels like giving up. Lionel tells him he did a great job and wants to play a recording of Bertie's voice to prove it. Bertie doesn't want to listen, but Lionel gives him the recording to keep. In the next scenes, they keep working on Bertie's speech with different exercises and techniques. We see how Bertie improves through scenes from different therapy sessions. Meanwhile, the king's health is getting worse, and the family talks about what will happen next. Bertie's brother, David, doesn't seem interested in his duties as a prince. The king worries about the problems David might cause and talks about the current political situation. The movie also shows Bertie practicing his speech in different places, like a factory and an airport. Even though it's hard at first, Bertie gets better at speaking, and there's a feeling of hope. Bertie and his wife Elizabeth go to a party at a place called Balmoral. David is there with a woman named Wallis Simpson who said some mean things about Elizabeth. Bertie is worried about David's relationship with Wallis because she's been divorced twice. Bertie talks to David about wanting to marry Wallis, but David doesn't take him seriously. The tension between the brothers gets worse, and Bertie has a hard time talking without stuttering when David is around. Bertie feels better when he's with Lionel, his speech therapist. In one of their therapy sessions, Bertie is really upset about his brother's behavior and how much pressure he feels being a royal. Lionel tells Bertie to let it all out, even using swear words to help him talk without stuttering. Bertie tries it, and they get into a big argument. It gets too intense, and Bertie leaves the session early. After their fight, Bertie is worried about becoming king if his brother David decides to step down. He talks about this with Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, who tells him about some scandals involving Wallis. The Prime Minister also tells David to think about what the people and the government expect from him. Next, the movie shows Bertie in his study talking to Winston Churchill. They talk about Bertie's brother David, who's thinking about giving up the throne. They also talk about the upcoming war with Germany and how important it is for the king to be strong and united. Churchill suggests that Bertie should use the name George when he becomes king. Bertie then visits David, who tells him he's decided to marry Wallis and give up the throne. Bertie is disappointed and says nobody wants this to happen. The movie shows David announcing on the radio that he's stepping down and supports Bertie as the new king. Bertie, his wife Elizabeth, and their daughters watch as David signs the document to officially step down. In another scene, Bertie is waiting nervously before he goes into a room at St. James Palace. He's handed a speech to read as the new king, but he stutters a lot and feels really embarrassed. Back at his house, Bertie tries to get used to all the paperwork he has to do as king. He feels overwhelmed and not good enough. Elizabeth comforts him and promises to support him as queen, and together they'll do their best. Later, Bertie and Elizabeth visit Lionel at his house. Lionel's wife Myrtle is surprised to see them and greets Elizabeth formally. Lionel and Bertie talk privately in Lionel's office, where Bertie accuses Lionel of being a fake because he doesn't have the right qualifications. Lionel explains that he has experience helping war veterans with speech problems and learned from doing that, not from formal training. Bertie gets really mad and starts arguing with Lionel, but they're interrupted when the Archbishop of Canterbury comes in. The Archbishop tells Bertie that he's found a new speech therapist and they don't need Lionel anymore. Bertie stands up for Lionel and says he should be the one to decide who helps him. Later, Bertie and Lionel practice what Bertie will say during his big ceremony at Westminster Abbey. They get into a bit of an argument about sitting on a special chair that has a lot of history. The Archbishop of Canterbury watches them and doesn't seem too happy about it. Next, the movie takes us to a movie room at Buckingham Palace, where Bertie, Elizabeth, and their daughters are watching a newsreel about Bertie's big ceremony. They chat about it with the Archbishop, who's a bit worried. Then they see news footage of Hitler giving powerful speeches. The scene moves to Buckingham Palace, where the Prime Minister Baldwin visits Bertie to quit his job because of the upcoming war. He admits that he should have listened to Churchill's warnings about Hitler and says Bertie's biggest challenge as king is still to come. Then we're back in Lionel's office, where his family is listening to the radio announcement that war with Germany has started. In the last part of the movie, Lionel is driving with Laurie and sees people putting sandbags around government buildings because of the war. An air raid siren goes off, but Lionel decides to keep driving. They get to Buckingham Palace, and Lionel goes inside while Laurie drives off. In the palace, Lionel gets a speech from Hardinge and rushes up to Bertie's office. They start practicing Bertie's speech for the live radio broadcast. Bertie stutters, but Lionel is there to encourage him and give him advice. Elizabeth comes in and tells Bertie it's time. Bertie, with Lionel and Elizabeth by his side, walks through the palace to the broadcasting booth. They say hi to Prime Minister Chamberlain and Churchill on their way. When they get to the booth, Bertie gets ready. He stutters a bit at first, but then gets more confident and gives a powerful speech. The movie ends with Bertie joining his family on a balcony, waving to the crowds, while Lionel watches from a distance. Thank you for watching my movie summary. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with my future movie summaries. I value your feedback, so please leave your comments and ideas below. I'll see you next time for more exciting summaries. Keep watching and keep learning.